All right, welcome back everyone to the University of Idaho and University of Wyoming Extension Sheep and Goat webinar series. And you have 3 hosts for the webinar series. I'm Melinda Ellison, University of Idaho Extension Sheep Specialist. Carmen Wilmore is the University of Idaho Extension Educator in Lincoln County, and Whit Stewart is the University of Wyoming Extension Sheep Specialist. As always, you can follow us on our Facebook pages, UI Sheep and Goats and UW Sheep, for all of the updates and information that we have for you guys. We also post all of these webinars after they've been completed to our YouTube channel, which is the University of Idaho Extension Livestock channel. So you can check out all of the webinars that we've done before. Today, I am excited to introduce Bridger Fuez, who's University of Wyoming Extension, and he's going to visit with you about using economic tools to manage some of the risks associated with sheep and goat production. So thank you very much for joining us today, Bridger, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Melinda. Good to be here with you today. So yeah, we're going to talk about some economic tools to manage production risk, and really this is part of a larger project that is a multi-state grant through the USDA Risk Management Agency. So Idaho, California, Montana, Wyoming, and Utah are all part of this effort to put together some curriculum and tools to help you manage your production risk. And we'll talk a little bit about that more as we go on. So currently I'm serving as the interim associate director for the west side of the state with University of Wyoming Extension. And then I also own Master Stockman Consulting, which is just a firm that allows me to travel around and do these sorts of programs through grant dollars. Let's see. So, some of the risk to sheep producers, certainly this isn't, the only risk out there, and there's many others. But, some of the common ones that I hear, are lambing death loss to predators, feed costs, and obtaining feed, market price of lambs, forage availability, whether that's affected by drought or pasture availability. And then, there's many other production risks that you face as sheep producers that you're more aware of than I am even. But certainly we'll kind of talk about each of these though today, just to give you a feel for some of the tools that we have for you to use. And then talk about some of the risk management products also that might address some of these. So, of course, if you've listened to many of my talks in the past, you know that we rely a lot on the Wyoming Ranch Tools site. This is the URL to that site, uwyoextension.org/ranch tools. But there's several tools on this site that really can help you make these sorts of production decisions in your operation, and we'll kind of outline some of those. So this is the list of tools now. We'll talk about the partial budget a little bit today. There's a net present value tool, break-even budget. I've shared that with Idaho wool grow, actually with Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming wool growers numerous times in the past in terms of when to market lambs and where you break even on those lambs, those sorts of things. The cow valuation / ewe valuation tool lets you look at how much you can afford to pay for ewes. Some other tools on there that can be helpful for sheep producers, the genetic investment tool. The stocking rate tool helps you get an idea of how many animals you can run on a pasture, how long, if you're changing timing or class of animals. There's a market comparison tool that can help. And then we're going to talk a little bit about that relative feed value tool as well today. So that's kind of the overview, just to let you know what's on that site. And we'll talk about some of them specifically. So coming soon as part of this project. So we agreed to do some of these workshops, but one of the outcomes that we're really excited about with this project is creating a YouTube channel focused on managing risk for sheep producers. So the idea is to go out spend some time with you as individuals on ranches, and get some real world examples, and then use some of these economic tools, genetic tools, production management tools, and develop these YouTube videos. So the idea is that they'd be live action in terms of, we'd be out on site, looking at sheep, managing sheep, and then also with a mix of presented information. So they're really a little more interesting than just sitting and listening to me today, hopefully. They're a real interactive way to sort of work through some of these problems and examples. So I guess I have a plea to you. If you are interested in the link to this channel, once we have it up and running, you can send me an email. We'd certainly be willing to send you a link. But also, as we go through some of these risk scenarios that I'm going to talk about today, if there's something on your place that you've been struggling with or you'd like to take a look at, there is some money for travel in this grant, and we might be available to come and spend a day or a half a day with you and work through some of this stuff, as long as you are willing to share some of that in an example. Certainly we would make sure that no confidential numbers were shared, but I think it's a fun project. It's a project that we look forward to. Melinda's on this project. Whit Stewart is also on it, and so we're excited about it. All right, so now let's go through some of those risks and think about how to look at them. So lambing death loss, certainly a risk. And some of the factors affecting that: timing, shed versus open range, interaction with genetics. Are you using highly efficient ewes that are throwing more twins and triplets? Certainly more labor is attached to that, and also a potential for increased death loss, although the advantages can be great there too. Is it a herder issue? I'm well aware and done a lot of work on this H2A herder program. So I understand the increasing cost of herders, but how many additional lambs would pay for a herder? I tried to look at it that way the other day, and maybe it's not how many lambs would pay for a herder, but could you run fewer sheep per herder and increase the lambing percentage as well? So, just a rough set of numbers there. If lambs are 85 pounds and you get $1.40 per lamb, that's about $119 per lamb. 170 lambs, that's $20,230. So, in just sort of rough math, without really doing the budget, you would have to save another 170 lambs. If you were running, a band of 800 to 1,000, you'd have to save another 170 per that band to pay for an extra herder to help you out during that lambing. So, just a different way to look at that in terms of what we usually think of. And really the right tool to make that decision is a partial budget. And the reason is, so this is the partial budget. You go through, well, what are all my additional costs going to be if I add a herder? It might be more than that 20,000 when you really consider all of that. And certainly when you save more lambs, you actually increase your costs a little, right? Because you'll have more animals to feed and care for. That certainly increases your income as well, right? So on the additional income side, you'd have those additional lambs. On the reduced income side, you probably wouldn't really reduce your income any by adding a herder in this example. And on the reduced cost side, probably you're not going to reduce costs. So you're probably really looking at additional costs and additional income in this example, and then it gives you a net income or loss. And like I said, these are the types of things that we want to work on and have, sort of real numbers in there to help you understand how you might utilize it in those how-to YouTube videos that we're working on. Another Another question often is predator loss, and it can be location, farm flock versus open range, shed versus open range, herders, dogs, other guardian animals, control. Again, the partial budget can really help with this. Several years ago, when we first started these workshops, one of the examples that we worked through with groups was, you know, how many dogs, or can you buy more dogs, and how many lambs do you need to save for each of those dogs? And that's really, the types of questions that partial budget can help you with is sort of those trade-offs, or how much can you spend on control, and how many lambs are saved versus that. So if these are questions that interest you, like I said, get a hold of either myself or Melinda or Whit, and we can work through that. So another risk that I hear a lot is feed cost. Especially, this year is pretty light in terms of snow for the desert flocks, but there are times when we have a lot of snow and people have to feed, and what's the best feed to buy? Or, you could be in other situations where you're feeding your lambs and trying to decide between feeds that are out there and their relative value. And feed costs, are the risks associated with it are availability, market prices, demand for that feed at that time. And so one tool that we developed that can really help you is this relative value of feed. So this calculator is here. It's the relative value of feed calculator. And the way it works is, if you will go out and look up your local corn price, soybean meal price, and alfalfa hay price. So that's what's entered here. The corn price, we have it in at $3 a bushel, soybean meal price at $200 a ton, and alfalfa hay at $150 a ton. And that's for mid-grade alfalfa. And then these are the values associated with it. So crude protein, TDN, NDF, and percent dry matter. So this gives a value of what that is really worth per ton. And then the rest of the calculator, which is helpful for you, is it shows you, based on these three feed types, so some of the most common and easiest to get prices on, what are other feedstuffs worth? So what's utility alfalfa hay worth? If these three are worth this per ton, utility alfalfa hay is worth $139.44 a ton. What's oat hay worth? Well, it's worth $175 a ton. What about wheat mids down here? They're worth $116 a ton. Or maybe dried distillers and solubles, $159, or some cottonseed, $155.65. So in these custom fields, you can enter custom information about a feed. So if you've got your own feed and you're trying to value it, or there's another feed type that's out there that you're trying to decide whether it's going to work for lambs, you can enter that information. You just enter the crude protein, TDN, NDF, and percent dry matter, and it'll give you a relative value of what that feed's worth. So, we're trying to really provide a tool to help you as you analyze those different feed sources each year. All right. So the next one I wanted to talk about in terms of risk is market price. And if we look at Northern Video this year in 2020, that early summer sale, there was 15,225 lambs that sold. They averaged 91 pounds, or just over 91 pounds. And the average price, that weighted average price, ended up at $127.20. So that's a value of $116.21 per lamb. That later summer sale, the next sale, which happened a month or two later, 16,000 lambs sold in that second sale. They averaged 85.68 pounds at $143.65 as a weighted average price. So the value for those lambs was $123.07. So if you're selling 1,000 lambs, $7,000, in a couple of months difference time in those sales can make a huge difference. And then the early fall sale really is not a fair comparison because there was only the one main set of lambs that sold, but they were 80-pound lambs that sold at 185, so a value of 148. Certainly, that 148 looks awful attractive to us right now if we sold early in the summer. But my point of this slide is, price risk is real for sheep producers. It's not new to you. It's not new news to you. It's a pretty thin market. There's limited buyers in the sheep business, and you guys realize that. And so you can have these dramatic swings in price. So it's a real tough thing to manage, and it's not real super easy to predict, definitely. If you called me early last summer and asked me if you should sell in that early sale, I would have probably told you, yeah. I would have probably told you it looks pretty scary going forward. Who knows what's going on with COVID, and we just don't know. Turns out I was wrong, obviously, from what ended up happening. But it's a challenge to manage this market price risk. So one of the tools that the USDA Risk Management Agency has is the LRP, Livestock Risk Protection for Lamb, and it ensures against declining market prices, which it seems like it's a good thing when it's working for us and in the sheep industry. So this is USDA Risk Management Agency product, as well as some of the others that we'll talk about. But LRP, the idea is that it establishes a floor selling price for your lambs, right? And so if the national cash price index falls below that insured level, then you receive a payment to even you out to that floor selling price, essentially. And it's very similar to a put option, if you're familiar with those. Certainly in the lamb business, we don't have that option. That's a cattle, or if you're a crop producer, you're more familiar with these put options. Cattle producers can use them. Options are, even for cattle producers, they're not as handy to use. They're fixed in size at 50,000 pounds, where LRP is much more flexible. You can insure one lamb up to 1,000 lambs on a single policy. And then LRP is purchased through a crop insurance rep. Unfortunately for the lamb industry or the sheep industry right now, it's currently not functioning or available. And the primary factor is the confidentiality of price reporting hurdle. So there has to be enough reporting and enough lambs being reported each week, so that somebody that's not fairly so that it's not obvious as to who owned those lambs when they were reported. And so you need multiple suppliers reporting fat lamb prices each week in order to make this work. And so a lot of the questions I've gotten recently about this LRP lamb is, well, the new Colorado plant's up and running. There's another plant coming in Texas. Won't we take care of that confidentiality? Shouldn't it already be taken care of? Why aren't we, why isn't this available? Well, one of the big reasons is there's actually a startup time lag in terms of that reporting. So USDA does not require those prices to be reported immediately as a plant gets up and running. So there is some time lag between once they get up and running and working and when they are required to report those prices. So we'll have to wait and see how much of this confidentiality issue is solved by the new plants coming online as they get started and begin reporting prices. I will also say on the LRP lamb that there's some good people working to solve this, and looking at, other ways to get around the confidentiality issue, or other price data sets, to make this a more reliable tool that we can consistently use in the sheep industry to offset this market price risk. So the last one I wanted to talk to you about was forage availability. In terms of a risk, certainly, widespread drought can be an issue for sheep producers, localized drought, rainfall deficiencies. One of the tools that's used the most right now, it's used a lot in livestock agriculture, both the sheep industry and cattle industry, is this pasture range and forage insurance. I do have to, there is a disclaimer that it is not drought insurance. So, I mentioned drought up here as part of that risk, but it really is rainfall deficiency insurance with the pasture range and forage insurance. So a few years ago, we kind of, as my small consulting company, we looked at this and looked at and developed some risk management rules that we thought it'd be good to encourage producers to live by. And one of them was to use crop insurance products to mitigate risk, not as a speculative money-making strategy. And then the other one was buying crop or livestock insurance every year may not be wise. There's a lot of times it's not wise for you, but analyzing your options every year is critical, because there are times when it makes a lot of sense. And for years, I've shown you this truck and I said, when you buy insurance for this, is this what you're hoping for? Are you hoping for a wreck? And I've really kind of counseled you on not using insurance hoping for a wreck. But that being said, I have to admit that there's a lot of research out there right now that shows producers have tended to be successful in pursuing a revenue maximization strategy with PRF range. So instead of looking at your most at-risk acreage, or the time frame where you think rainfall is most needed for your operation, producers have tended to work with insurance providers who have sophisticated models that essentially just try and maximize the revenue from the investment in this insurance. So, fundamentally, as a sort of an academic economist, I'm not sure I really like that, but also I realize it is a form of risk management. You're not necessarily truly managing your rainfall risk with that strategy, but you are managing revenue risk. So, I mean, it's a reasonable strategy. And like I said, I've had to step back a little and not be quite as hard on folks who use this strategy because it's been pretty successful. A couple other interesting things in terms of this PRF range. Wyatt Fates, actually he's my son, just finished a thesis where his master's thesis where he looked at impacts of high altitude elevation or high elevation rain and snowfall stations and what the impacts were on grids, and found quite a bit of, he found that it was significant that in states like Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, most of his research was done in Utah, where we have significant differences in elevation changes, even within those small 17 by 17 mile grids. And the other thing that's common in all three of those states, Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming, is that we do not have very many weather stations. So that lack of stations and the potential for significant elevation differences did lead to situations when a high elevation station came on board that it significantly changed that rainfall index for a few years until it was able to realign with that new station. So, just a caveat to consider, interesting work that Wyatt was able to complete. The other thing of interest for you guys, Ryan Larson with Utah State University, working with Ryan Fates and Kyle Fates. Those are my nephews. So Fates is not a very common name unless you're working in risk management, and then there's all kinds of Fateses involved, I guess. But they developed a model for Colorado, Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming, and that's the link to that model. And I'll show you what the model does. It helps you look at potentially using this PRF. So the way the model works is you enter your state, your county, your grid, and the coverage information that you want, and it generates a summary similar to this. So I just entered this one without even looking at the grid or the timing. I just threw these up in this example, but in this example, certainly it shows a $9,000 loss on this. So definitely do not use my strategy. But this is a way to assess historically and most likely outcomes by different policy strategies with this pasture range and forage insurance. If you're interested in getting started or you need to know your grid, you can go out to masterstockman.com. There's RMA Crop Insurance 101 webinars. So there's a webinar out there that really kind of works you through how you might get started with PRF. The way PRF works now, and I'm going to talk to you about the changes that are being proposed and whether that's going to occur or not, but they're area plans. It's not individual coverage. It's an index based on a deviation from normal historical precipitation. So timely payments, it doesn't reward poor management practices. You can use it either for grazing or haying. You just have to establish acreage for either haying or grazing of livestock. It's based on the rainfall index from NOAA, and your grid that your ranch would be in. Some ranches are in multiple grids. It's a 17 by 17 mile grid, and you must select at least two-month periods when you do this insurance currently. So the proposed changes by RMA, which was open for comment, and I know they extended that comment period if you're interested, and they have extended the time to make this final decision, but they wanted to eliminate winter months coverage. They wanted to go from 2 to 4 month intervals. They wanted to factor in livestock numbers. They wanted a weighted county-based values. Sale closing date moved to December 1st. They wanted to go to smaller grid sizes, which could be a real challenge in states like Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, where weather stations can be quite a ways from even these larger grids. And then they wanted to limit grid selection to physical location of the acreage. So that's the proposed changes for this product. If you're interested in it, my first step always is to recommend you find a good crop insurance agent. You can go out to the USDA's webpage and look at to find an agent. Certainly find somebody just like your banker, your accountant, your lawyer that you can trust, you can work with, and that you understand and are able to work with going forward. So that's kind of a brief overview of some of the tools, some of the risks that you face. Certainly, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Also, thinking about some specific examples that you might like to see, for those YouTube videos. Certainly shoot me an email as well. Or if you want to volunteer to be a host operation for one of those YouTube videos, we'd love to do that. So with that, I guess I'll stop and answer some questions if there are any.
Thank you so much. This these tools are really valuable, and I would recommend all of you guys to at least check them out and see if there's something that you can use to within your operation. Right now, we don't have many questions. We did have one asking what you think of breeding and pedigree programs like Evans software, but I'm not sure that's related to economics or not. So Carrie, if you're still on, if you want to maybe clarify that a little bit. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in the meantime.
Melinda, I would just say that I've been kind of working on some of that this year, not any one specific program. So I haven't looked at Evans software, but in terms of those breeding and pedigree programs, I think they can be helpful in terms of managing your herd, and the more information and the better records you have, certainly, even these tools that are on my website, the more accurately you can understand your individual costs and sort of unit costs that some of these pedigree programs help you with, the better accuracy you're going to be on using these tools of mine. And then the other tool that can be fairly handy in sort of utilizing these sorts of analysis tools is just to have a good set of ranch accounting systems. So whether you use QuickBooks or just Excel, but having a good set of ranch accounting that aligns with, you can take a look at the University of Idaho budgets. You could look at the ASI cost of production budgets. You can kind of align your categories with those enterprise budgets. It can create a lot of power in terms of benchmarking and utilizing those tools to help you make decisions.
Yeah, Carrie just mentioned that she can keep information on recording feed costs and sales of sheep in that program. So that's why she was asking.
Yeah, and so like I say, I think that's really helpful to have those records either in a spot like that or like in your financials, because then when you're making these sorts of decisions, it really adds a lot of power to the decisions. So.
Absolutely. The next question that we have coming in is, do you have a preferred RFID reader or software that you would recommend?
I don't. If someone else on the panel does, but that's not an area that I've spent a lot of time looking into. So unfortunately, I'm not too good on that one.
Yeah, I have to be honest, I don't really have a good answer for that one either. I think it's probably a matter of shopping around and finding one that's within your budget and also does what you're looking for.